Hey everyone, welcome to today's video where we're diving deep into the best spells in Avowed and ranking them from top tier to, well, spells you might want to avoid. If you're gearing up to cast your way through the game, then you're definitely going to want to know which spells pack the most punch. Whether you're a fan of massive damage, defense, or something a little more tactical, this tier list is going to break it all down for you. Stick around because we've got explanations for each ranking that will help you understand exactly why these spells are worth your time, or why you might want to skip them entirely. In this video, we'll be looking at everything from S tier spells that can turn the tide of battle in an instant to those lower tier spells that might leave you wondering if you made the right choice. We're not just telling you where they rank, we're also breaking down the reasons behind it. So, if you want to know which spells will help you rule the battlefield and which ones are best left in the back pocket, this is the video for you. Let's get into it. I'm quickly moving on to the video and I'm ranking spells in Avowed. Before we start, if you enjoy these types of tier list videos, don't forget to like the video and subscribe. Enjoy watching.
My friends, only 0.1% of viewers subscribe. If you like this type of content, please do not forget to subscribe to the channel. Thank you in advance for your support.
The spells in this tier are, in order from top left to bottom right, Arcane Veil, Bristling Frost, Ring of Fire, Jolting Touch, and Chill Blades. Alright, let's talk about some of the lesser known spells in Avowed that, despite their cool concepts, don't quite live up to the hype. You might have tried some of these in your playthroughs and been like, well, that didn't work out as planned. So, today we're diving into the C tier spells, those that are just kind of there, but not quite doing enough to be worth your time in the long run. Let's start with Chill Blades. Now, on paper, this one seems like a solid option. It's cheap and builds up frost accumulation against single entities. That sounds nice, right? Unfortunately, it's a bit of a one-trick pony. The issue here is that it doesn't track enemies well, which can be a major pain when you're trying to land those hits consistently. As the game progresses, you'll find yourself looking for something a bit more reliable. Sure, it's good for those early frost setups, but once the enemies get tougher, Chill Blades just doesn't keep up. Then we've got Arcane Veil. Oh boy, this one is kind of a letdown. The spell promises damage negation and uninterruptible casting, which sounds like a dream for any mage, right? But here's the kicker. This spell is basically useless if you're not the kind of mage who constantly gets hit. Which, let's be honest, isn't a great playstyle choice to begin with. If you're getting hit that often, you're already in a bad spot, and Arcane Veil isn't going to save you. It's like putting a band-aid on a broken arm, not the solution you're looking for. Moving on, we have Bristling Frost. Now, this one's a bit of a mess. Its damage negation effect just doesn't work well in the context of frost accumulation. You're trying to keep enemies at bay with frost, but you're also supposed to get close enough to them to trigger the frost buildup, so it's a bit of a contradiction. Not to mention, if you're on fire, because why not? It won't even clear the fire debuff. You'd be better off sticking to frost spells that keep you safely at a distance and leave this one on the shelf. Speaking of fire, let's talk about Ring of Fire. Another spell that suffers from the same problem as Bristling Frost, damage negation that's just not worth the risk when you're a squishy caster. The idea of encircling yourself in fire sounds cool, but in reality, you'll probably just get swarmed by enemies who are very much not concerned with your fiery defense. The spell might work in a hybrid Spellblade build, but for pure casters, it's more of a drain on your essence than a useful tool. Now, here's one that's pretty meh. Jolting Touch. Lightning sounds amazing, right? But Shock is probably one of the weakest status effects in the game. This spell forces you to slow down and channel lightning, which doesn't really do much. Other lightning spells have better homing and AoE, so there's no real reason to use Jolting Touch when you've got more reliable options. Sure, the idea of zapping enemies close to you is fun, but when you can get the same effect with a spell that doesn't tie you down, you know it's time to move on. So yeah, these C tier spells in Avowed really struggle to find their niche. Whether it's the lack of tracking, awkward positioning, or just being outclassed by better options, they don't offer enough to be considered anything more than filler in your spellbook. If you've been using these, you've probably noticed they feel a little lackluster compared to the more flashy, powerful spells you've unlocked later in the game. But hey, don't let these spells drag you down. There are far better options out there that offer much more reliable effects. So, if you find yourself stuck with these on your hotbar, it might be time to start looking for some upgrades. Trust me, your essence will thank you. Anyway, that's it for the C tier spells in Avowed. Let me know which ones you've tried and what your experience was with them. Or maybe you've got some hidden gems in the game that we haven't covered yet. Drop a comment below and let's keep this spell chat going. The spells in this tier are, in order from top left to bottom right, Fan of Flames, Crackling Bolt, Fireball, Returning Storm, Corrosive Siphon, and Parasitic stuff. Alright, let's talk about some of those middle-of-the-road spells in Avowed, the ones that are decent but never quite hit the mark to elevate them into the top tiers. You know, the ones you look at and think, okay, this could work, if only. First up, let's dive into Fan of Flames. Now this one sounds pretty cool, right? It inflicts decent fire accumulation and can do some nice damage early on, but the problem is, by mid-game, it really starts to fall off. Unless you're willing to sink more points into it to get it to rank 2, you're just left with a flame flicker that feels kinda pointless. By the time you've spent those points, you'll probably have better spells or passives that do the job faster. Next up, we've got Parasitic Staff. This one is interesting. It's like the game's version of a gimmick spell, where you conjure up a staff to regenerate essence. But there's a catch. This staff shares the same attack speed and stamina penalty as a great hammer. So yeah, you're getting your essence back and you're stunning enemies left and right, but you're also draining your stamina at a rapid pace. It's a fun concept, but doesn't feel all that practical once you realize how much stamina you're burning just to swing it around. Kind of a one-trick pony, honestly. Then there's Corrosive Siphon. Now this spell actually shines in certain scenarios. It's a channeling spell that heals you based on the damage you deal, which is fantastic for boss fights, especially if you're taking some heavy hits. But here's the catch, if the enemy is immune to poison, this spell pretty much becomes useless. So it's really hit or miss, and you have to be careful about when and where you use it. But if you can make it work, it's a pretty nice self-sustain option during those tough battles. Let's talk about Crackling Bolt. It's a shock spell, and the cool part is that it can track enemies and even bounce between multiple targets. Sounds pretty awesome, right? Well, the thing is, unless you're rocking some specialized equipment or fighting in certain environmental conditions, like say a watery area, the damage here is a bit underwhelming. It's fun to use, but it doesn't have that wow factor you might expect from a spell in this tier. Still, if you've got the right setup, it can be handy for a little bit of extra chaos. Then we have Fireball. This one's a classic, but I've got to be honest, it peaks early and doesn't really hold up as well later on. In the beginning, it's decent. It's great for quickly clearing out smaller mobs or dealing some nice fire damage, but once you hit the mid-game, it's like it just fizzles out. The damage isn't as impressive, and the fire accumulation doesn't really keep up either. Plus, the rank up bonuses, not great. It feels like you've outgrown it by the time you reach the later stages of the game. Now, let's move on to Returning Storm. This one's got potential, especially with its shock build-up. You summon a storm in an AoE, which sounds cool in theory, right? The issue is that it doesn't have any sort of slow effect, meaning enemies can just run out of it before they even get shocked. It's one of those spells that's pretty good in theory, but it needs a little more to make it truly effective. You can try pairing it with crowd control spells like Pull of Eora or Blizzard to make it a bit more reliable, but on its own, it's a little lackluster. Overall, these spells fall into the B tier category. They have their moments, sure, but they also come with limitations that keep them from being true standouts. You've got some fun mechanics here, but it often feels like they need a little extra polish or synergy to really shine. They're not bad by any means, just not the go-to options once you've unlocked more powerful abilities. So if you're playing around with these in Avowed, don't be afraid to experiment and see how they fit into your playstyle. But honestly, by the time you hit the later stages of the game, you'll probably want to swap them out for something a bit more effective. You can't rely on these to carry you through the tough fights, but they can definitely fill in the gaps if you're in a pinch. The spells in this tier are, in order from top left to bottom right, Grimoire Snap, Blizzard, Arcane Seal, Meteor Shower, and Missile Salvo. Alright, let's dive into some of the most fun and useful spells in Avowed. Today, we're talking A tier spells, the ones that pack a punch and are pretty much your best friends when it comes to clearing rooms and shutting down enemies. These aren't just good, they're reliable. Let's get into it. First up, we've got Grimoire Snap. This one's a crowd control powerhouse, and honestly, I love it. It's perfect for those moments when enemies are just piling on and you need a quick get off me spell. It ragdolls smaller to medium enemies like a charm, and even against bigger foes, it builds up some solid stun. The downside, it kind of starts losing its edge in the later game unless you've really invested in it, so you'll want to hit rank 2 at least. At that point though, it's a total lifesaver. Next, there's Blizzard. This classic AoE frost spell doesn't disappoint. Not only does it slow down enemies, but it can also trigger freeze effects, which is basically your guarantee that things are about to get real chilly for your enemies. The best part? It's more reliable than other frost spells like Returning Storm, and it outshines Fireball because that slow factor gives you a bit more control, especially if you're dealing with a group of enemies. Frosty goodness all around. Arcane Seal is up next, and let me tell you, this one's a game changer. It might not look like much, but when you stand in its AoE, you're getting that sweet essence regeneration. The seal itself covers a large area, which means you can dodge around and still benefit from the region while dishing out damage. It's perfect for longer fights where you need a bit of extra sustainability. Trust me, you'll feel the difference when you're not scrambling for essence every 2 seconds. Moving on, we've got Missile Salvo. Now this is an awesome area denial spell, especially against stationary enemies like archers or mages. It fires off a barrage of missiles, nuking anything caught in the blast, but here's the catch. The AoE isn't massive, and if you're dealing with mobile enemies, it can sometimes be a bit hit or miss. Still, when you've got a crowd of unmoving targets, this spell is absolutely lethal. And then there's Meteor Shower. When you need that raw explosive power, this is the spell you reach for. It hits hard and does solid damage on each meteor strike. The only issue? The wait time between meteors can feel a little long, so it's not exactly the fastest spell out there. Still, compared to Fireball, it's leagues better. Larger AoE, decent damage, and that fiery destruction, it's a solid pick, especially if you're facing a group of enemies. So there you have it, some of the most powerful and reliable spells you'll want in your A-tier arsenal in Avowed. Whether you're controlling the battlefield with Blizzard and Arcane Seal, or blasting enemies away with Meteor Shower and Missile Salvo, these spells bring the heat, and they get the job done. What's your go-to spell from this list? Let me know down in the comments. The spells in this tier are, in order from top left to bottom right, Black Bow, Freezing Pillar, Spirit Lance, Blast of Frost, Minor Missiles, and Pull of Aura. Alright, let's talk about the absolute powerhouses in Avowed, the S tier spells that are just too good to be ignored. If you're looking to bring some serious chaos to the battlefield, these are the spells you'll want to load up on. Trust me, these will make you feel like a god amongst mortals. First up, we've got Black Bow, a spell that is straight up busted. Seriously. The bow you summon, it's ridiculously strong in every possible way. You get poison procs in just 2 hits, which is pretty satisfying. And if that wasn't enough, the charged shots are perfect for ragdolling enemies, sending them flying like ragdolls. Plus, it can consistently damage skull-marked enemies even on the toughest difficulty levels. No wonder this spell is so highly ranked. Next, let's talk about Freezing Pillar. This one's a game changer. It's a frost nuke that packs a serious punch. When you cast it, not only do you deal a ton of damage, but you also stack frost on enemies, and once they're frozen, you get to take them out while they're slowed down by the frost debuff. That's slow. It's a total game changer for keeping enemies at bay. Then there's Spirit Lance, which let me tell you is an absolute blast to use. You're a spellcaster, but when you summon this bad boy, you're wielding a weapon that deals crazy damage. On top of that, it has a stun effect on hit. But the cherry on top, the mini explosions that deal splash damage to anyone nearby. You've got yourself a ranged powerhouse with this one, and I'm all about that. Now, I'm sure you're familiar with the struggle of crowd control, right? Enter Pull of Aura, and suddenly, you've got a way to keep those annoying enemies off your back. This spell lifts enemies up into the air, giving you space to breathe. It's perfect for healing, regrouping, or just taking a moment to breathe. The best part is it pulls up large enemies too, and as you upgrade it, the number of enemies it can lift increases. You're basically a one-person crowd control army. Speaking of controlling the battlefield, Blast of Frost is hands down the king of channeled spells. This one doesn't just deal frost damage, it stacks it. That means enemies get slowed, then eventually frozen, which is perfect for setting up break damage. And if you're lucky, you can even land one-shots with this thing. You'll find yourself laughing at how easily you can handle groups of enemies with this on your side. And we can't forget about Minor Missiles. This spell is the unsung hero of the spellcaster world. Why? Well, it's got a cheap casting cost and a super low cooldown, making it perfect for constantly dishing out damage. Not only does it hit hard, especially at max rank, but it also tracks moving enemies and interrupts their attacks. Basically, you've got a missile system that can shut down anyone trying to do something sneaky. Let's be real, these spells aren't just good, they're game-changing. Each one brings something unique to the table, whether it's stunning enemies, freezing them in their tracks, or giving you the crowd control you need to survive. If you're looking to make your time in Avowed a breeze, these S-tier spells are the way to go. So, which one's your favorite? You might find yourself swapping between them depending on the situation, but once you get your hands on these spells, it's hard to go back to anything else. Give them a try, and you'll see what I mean. Avowed gets a whole lot easier when you're wielding this much power. The video ends here. See you in another video. Don't forget to subscribe.